And indeed, the WikiLeaks that have affected our understanding of our policy in the Middle East have been profound. In Tunisia alone, shortly before Mohamed Bouaziz's act, was the WikiLeaks that said that we had declined to return a Guantanamo detainee because our ally, the nation of Tunisia, tortured political prisoners, and Tunisia was lobbying the EU not to accept this man. But the fact is that the State Department human rights reports have said for a decade that Egypt and Jordan and Tunisia and Saudi Arabia and Yemen are systematic and regular violators of human rights. And so the United States is left in the kind of strange position of having deep interest in the region, focused on words, I think, oil, Palestine, projection of military force, and a footnote occasionally a concern for human rights and the other transcendent values that we say we stand for. And now we're at a moment, as Bernard says, when it's hard to get your footing because so many things are happening at the same time. But it's interesting if you focus on the president's speech about what he said, what he didn't say, and how much there was of symbolic interest in that speech. What was the only concrete policy objective of the United States that was articulated? That the actions of Gaddafi are putting enormous strains on the peaceful yet fragile transitions in Egypt and Tunisia. The democratic impulses that are dawning across the region would be eclipsed by the darkest form of dictatorship as repressive leaders concluded that violence is the best strategy to cling to power. Now, we could probably spend a day on those two sentences. But it's interesting from the point of view of understanding that the president in a speech, and by the way, while I am critical of Obama on many areas for being timid, I actually think it was an artful speech, and I personally think that he's tried to deal with a legacy of 30 years of absurd policies in a way that suggested some skill. R2P is a doctrine that Professor Boubilia disagrees with. Teaching with Professor Boubilia would be like teaching with 5 pit bulls running around ready to lunge at any moment. Because you're always in the middle of a sentence when he's a provocateur, when some idea totally contrary to the one you're articulating comes flying over the train. But the question of R2P has to be brought forth, notwithstanding Professor Boubilia's skepticism. It is a concept that at least some argue has roots in the Charter. It's a very complicated idea and a difficult one for us to boil down into simple terms. Its first clear articulation comes in 2001, when in response to some 9/11 issues, there was a Canadian commission which looked at the question of what used to be called humanitarian intervention. So can we find roots in the Charter for there ever being a time for states to intervene, not strictly militarily, in the affairs of others? And it looked at Article 24, which is really about the authority of the Security Council, and found roots there for a doctrine it called the responsibility to protect, which at first level requires states to protect their own populations in terms of a regime of rights that are long established and are rhetorically embraced by every nation on the planet. But it also posits, not exclusively or even primarily in terms of military intervention, an obligation on the part of the international community to act where the nation states do not. It sets forth some criteria, and just for those of you who are new to the idea, there are 4 pages in the material that I submitted which might be useful. In 2009, Ban Ki-moon reiterated the resolutions of the World Summit of 2005 that in very simple terms set forth what R2P means when all of the means have been exhausted. There are humanitarian law violations taking place, crimes against humanity. And what steps are required? First of all, it's a case-by-case analysis. There must be a decision in the Security Council. There must be support from regional organizations. And there must be measured use of force. Now, whether you agree that R2P is a good doctrine or not, it's plainly the doctrinal basis on which the United States had to be acting at the time it supported and then sought to implement the no-fly zone. And yet, the president makes a speech. It comes from the Boubilia, so I'm skeptical. Is it true or not?
Oh, he's the moderator.
Okay. Not a mention of international law. Not a mention of R2P, which is the only doctrinal basis on which the United States could be there. And in fact, He did make the case without articulating it. He said, we have a man poised outside of Benghazi with troops and the capacity to kill hundreds of thousands of people. He said he'll show them no mercy, which interpreted as no quarter is a flagrant violation of humanitarian law and the laws of war. We have members of his government saying that he is committing crimes against humanity. We have pictures from Al Jazeera and CNN. We have several regional organizations that have asked us to intervene. So the platform is big, but why doesn't he say it? Of course, because in the context of the American polity, which hasn't been taught to be sophisticated about how complex has been our sometimes destructive involvement in the Middle East, and which shies away from notions of international law, what could he do? On the right, he has the conservative hawks, like McCain, who say, we should have been there with the 82nd Division a long time ago. You have people like the neocons, John Bolton, who says international law should never bind us, we should do what we want to do without international strictures. And you have what I, and this is my bias, would call the idiot right, of Sarah Palin, saying, we have no interest in the Middle East, or none in Libya. And then attacked from Dennis Kucinich, who says, well, it's unconstitutional, and we have no interest in the region. So, given that set of circumstances, it isn't shocking that he wouldn't mention international law. But it suggests that a wonderful teaching moment about our 2P, and about what our consequences of our actions have been in this region, and about the fact that tremendous change is taking place in this region, and we will have to decide as a people whether our tremendous economic, military, and diplomatic strength will truly be at the service of people who are struggling for the most fundamental ideas, which are the second generation of the rights which we say are the basis of this republic. Last point. This is how Bernard snuck one more idea in. Last point. I recall one of the most interesting moments that I had intellectually when we were teaching in Bernard's wonderful program. I think you may have been there. We persuaded him to give us a half day for the whole program to meet some people from the Cairo Institute for Human Rights with whom we've been doing some work unrelated to the program. And at the time, there was a great discussion of FGM, female genital mutilation. And we had a robust discussion about it. And one of the human rights folks from the Cairo Institute stood up, and he was angry because he thought that our students were showing, at least the Westerners, sort of a pornographic interest, not sexually pornographic, but intellectually pornographic interest in FGM. He said, it's a pre-Islamic artifact. It's really not the key human rights issue. And oh, by the way, you arrogant Westerners, you think that the human rights is born of the Enlightenment. Well, I say it's born of the Quran. And he started talking about the Casablanca Declaration and those aspects of the Holy Quran which he thought serve as roots for the Declaration. Of course, what we know from the travaux surrounding the Declaration and its drafting was that there was a scrupulous effort to avoid the issue of the sources of these rights. If they were to be universal, to find them in the Quran, or in the Old Testament or the New, or in any other holy book, would make for difficult deliberations and maybe no document. But if they are universal, then their roots must be everywhere. And so part of the challenge for us is to, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of the unfolding of these tremendous events, is to keep an eye on what are our fundamental principles. Because if we don't do it, then our leaders, none of whom can be trusted except perhaps for Nasser, and he's long gone, will have an eye on other objectives that are perhaps not so universal. Thank you.